places where strange patterns, geometric patterns, form in circles of wheat during the summer months when they're all green and flourishing, and leave this strange pattern that you can see mainly from above. People have photographed this with planes and so on. Now the question is, how on earth are they made? Are they made by some sort of extraterrestrials? Are they made by people having a laugh after the pub shut the night before? There are different theories about what crop circles are and how they're made. I've been in a couple, and it's a mystery. We don't know. But there are people that specialise in the study of crop circles, and they're fascinating. I suspend judgment, but it is sort of a new religious movement. The kind of people that go chasing crop circles, and when one's announced, they all go off and chase away in their car and take photographs and things. If you get a chance ever to lie down on a beautiful sunny day in a newly made crop circle in Wiltshire, I strongly recommend it. It's quite one of those life's blissful experiences, wherever they come from. Okay, so that's this category on the box is quite interesting. The boxes of new religious movements. I'm sure there's many other things I've left out, and hopefully some of the listeners to this will go on and explore, in their own way. Maybe when we finish at the end of this talk, we might have some discussion about what will be the future of religions. What will be a new religious movement 100 years from now, 200 years. We can discuss that at the end. I might make some suggestions where to look. But there's a couple of categories that we haven't really done as yet, and one of them is very old, and then one of them is quite recent, and I just want to mention the one that's very old first. I spent a bit of time on this, which is Jainism, because we haven't covered this in this series properly. Jainism is an ancient Indian religion associated with Mahavira, who was a contemporary of Buddha, probably slightly older than Buddha. But they were from the same part of northern India in about the 6th century BC, so 550 years before Christ. And Mahavira was his life is outwardly fairly uneventful, very similar to Buddha's, and it's interesting, by tradition he met with Gautama Buddha, so they did meet. And I'd love to know more about that. We've got versions of the encounter told by Buddhists and other ones told by the Jains. They tell slightly different stories. There were a few ideological, intellectual differences between Buddha and Mahavira. Buddha was very difficult to draw on the nature of ultimate questions. He didn't like to talk metaphysics and philosophy. He liked people to experience it. And then he took the view that once you've experienced it, you don't need to talk about it. He wanted to give people a ticket how to get there. And that was it. So his teaching, which he just devised, was a sort of series of steps for self-transformation. I think Mahavira was more happy to talk about, the whole thing. And in Jainism, they don't have such an absolutist view that there is no self, anatta, the Buddhist doctrine. Buddhists say that when you encounter absolute truth, when you reach the end of philosophy, then the self dissolves into nothingness, the void, nirvana, shunyata, and there's no selfhood left. I think that what's happening there is, as I said, is when the individual self dissolves into the world soul, the anima mundi, at a certain point it can feel like it's free floating in outer space. It can even go beyond the world soul, because after all, it's not that big a planet. It's not going to be around forever. I mean, it has got a beginning. It will have an end. Okay, it's going to be 4,000 million years we've been going around the sun on this planet, and about the same time again, maybe a bit more. but then it'll come to an end. So it's temporary. And Buddha's insight was that all this is temporary, therefore don't get fussed about it. Mahavira's view, yes, of course it's all temporary, and he believed in an absolute, like Buddha, sort of huge time scale. So your individual life is just like a gnat on a stream, as Yeats said, and you have countless of them. For Mahavira, the thing is to achieve victory. I mean, if life is an enlightenment game, which it is, according to all the traditions actually, certainly according to most of the esoteric ones in Jainism, then our duty as souls is to reach as deep an abiding state of enlightenment as possible. And that includes calmness, not being disturbed, not being neurotic. It means transcending our tendencies to neurosis, which is all about ego and grasping, and fear of loss. Being prepared to die each day, so Jain means a victor. Well, who wins the victory is a bit like in Solomon's testing of who's the real mother of the baby. It's the person that's prepared to surrender, who only has love for the child, who wants the child to live. And that act of surrender, which is what Muhammad emphasised, is the hallmark of a true Jain. And they say you shouldn't even hold on to ideas like I'm right, you're wrong. You know, the trouble with Western philosophy, say Jains, is it's all combative. It's like a competitive sport, like so many other things in the West. As Gandhi said, it would be good if we tried Western civilization. The hallmark of civilization, say the Jains, is the ability to surrender fixed positions. Is there a God? Isn't there a God? Well, you know, I don't know. Let's find out. Let's talk about it. Let's think about it. Let's certainly not go to war about it. Is there a this God or a that God? Or is there a goddess? Or is there 10 gods or 3 gods? Is there a trinity? Let's reflect on it, and meanwhile we'll suspend judgment. That's what the Jains said. That's what Mahavira said. He didn't say like Buddha, no, we're not going to talk about it because human language isn't capable of talking about it. To me, that's a cop-out. Mahavira said to Buddha, yeah, I know where you're coming from, yeah, and it's difficult to talk about these things, but let's try, shall we? Because if we stop people talking about these things or asking questions, then it's a kind of suppression. It's suppressing their free active intellect, which we've been endowed with, which wants to ask questions about philosophy and religion. So let's all discuss. And over the 2,500 years since Mahavira came, these Jains have been carrying on with this conversation. There's quite a few million Jains in India, and there's a whole unbroken lineage have come down since Mahavira. In parts of India, the monks and the kind of spiritual initiates have renounced everything. So they say to get absolute truth, you have to give up ownership, ego. You don't, and they even renounce clothes. So they just wander around naked in the warmth of India, and they're recognised as that's one particular branch of Jains called the Digambara. And I've met Digambaras, but only with their clothes on. I've not met full-on naked Munis in the forests. There are some still. The other Jains are called Svetambara, and they say it's fine to wear, like, if you're a monk or a nun, you wear white robes, white clothes, and they're the ones I've had more dealings with, particularly in Rajasthan, where there's a lot of Svetambara Jains, and I've met quite a few of their intellectuals, had long conversations with them. They contributed a lot to the history of maths. I went to a very interesting seminar in Delhi on Jain contributions to the history of science and the history of maths. They helped invent the zero as a concept. Jains have studied the nature of infinity for the last 2,000 years. Because they lead very pure lives, their intellects are radiant, and they therefore have intellectual space to think about really complicated mathematical issues, like the nature of infinity. They say there are 6 types of infinity. And when I talked to them I tried to get some clarification on what are the 6 types of infinity. I found that interesting. And it helped inspire me to write my book on Principia Mathematica Philosophiae Religionis, which is a study of a new branch of mathematics that I call religious mathematics. And for that I use the periodic table, which is a mathematical tool. One of the questions I ask my Jain mathematicians is, how many souls have ever been in incarnation on this planet? Like, can we put a number to it? And then how many incarnations do they need per soul to reach enlightenment? Like, can we put a number? Is it 50, 100, 1,000, And like, is it always roughly the same, or do some take a very long time? And is there a through rate? Is this planet a sort of transit zone for souls from other parts of the universe that incarnate here? Let's say it takes 250 lives on average to reach enlightenment. So how many souls would have had to incarnate during the whole life cycles of Homo sapiens on this planet, which, let's date it from 100,000 years ago. Work out the maths. How many could have reached enlightenment by now? And what happens when they do? Do they then leave the planet and go to some other more enlightened planet? Or do they go to a sort of interworld place, like a kind of domain that we can't see, but is still on this planet? Okay, so I've asked those kind of questions and had those discussions with these Jains. Their theory, their official theory, and this is a map of the universe according to Jainism, which I got in a Jain academy. This is the shape of the universe according to them. It's a sort of key-like thing. The swastika for them is an auspicious sign. It was stolen by the Nazis who turned it around the wrong way. It stands for the energy that moves the entire manifestation cycles of all the galaxies and all worlds, right? And eventually, and I think we have incarnations on different planets. I don't think this is the only planet where we humans, or we souls rather, get to incarnate. We have, lives here. We reach enlightenment such as this planet can afford. I think we then move on to other planets and other worlds, other solar systems and other galaxies even. And each one has a different tonality of enlightenment potential. I think this planet's rather naughty. I think this planet's got more violence than usual. I think there are planets where people do mostly music. I think, and you can reach a kind of musical enlightenment. There are planets where people do mostly kind of art, or mostly lovemaking. There's different forms of enlightenment on offer. This planet is a bit naughty because it's doing a lot of violence. I think this would be the Jain position. And therefore, it's really important on this planet, if you're going to make progress, is to abstain from violence. You can't make soul progress if you continue to use violence, because that violence represents the negation of another being. Taking the life, or blocking, or hurting, or insulting, or shouting, or just refusing to listen to. Violence can take place on subtle planes. The Jains say violence can be on the level of thought. So you sit there saying, I hate you, you're evil, I want to destroy you, think. Or the language of words, like you can say you hate somebody, they're horrible. Or actions, so you physically fight or kill somebody. Now, for a Jain, you should abstain from violence on all three, thought, word and deed, so that you can flourish to your enlightenment potential, and so can they. And you do that on different planets over very long cycles of incarnation. Eventually, say the Jains, we're all going to get to enlightenment. Every soul and incarnation, the point isn't that we should suffer. The point is we self-cause the suffering, either individually or collectively. We grow out of it eventually, and then we eventually reach a place of purity and wisdom, which is what enlightenment is, a shorthand description of. And once we do that, we go to the top of the universe. And this diagram is, you've got to think of this as like, to go from here to there would be a very long way indeed. We're talking, unimaginable distances. it's also a question of whether it's a physical thing. Why is the universe this shape? When I went to this conference on Jainism and science, I asked the question about that. I said, you know, when this shape was designed by early Jains 2,500 years ago, we didn't know much about astronomy. We hadn't measured the galaxies. We didn't know how big the universe was. Have modern Jains, who've now studied cosmology and astronomy, have they reformulated the pattern or the shape? Because it seems it's more like a sphere. You know, discuss. I don't know. Maybe this is a cross section of the sphere. I don't know. But what I do know is that when you reach Kaivalya Jnana, which is enlightenment, you go to the top bit, which is here, represented by these dots. And that's where all the great saints of history and all the most enlightened people, you know, the Jungs, the Goethes, the Christs, the Buddhas, the Mahaviras, that's where they're all hanging out now. They're all there having a good chat and doing their meditational philosophy classes and so on, and beaming enlightenment to the entire universe. Meeting up with Krishna and all the saints and sages from all civilizations and cultures. And they stay as individuals. So in the Jain universe, they haven't dissolved into a sort of a nothing void like in Buddhism. They stay as the individual, but the individual plus cosmos. So the cosmic consciousness is all pervading, but the individual sort of stays being Jesus or Buddha or whatever. I kind of like that because I find that more compatible with the Christian teaching about heaven. In heaven, you don't just dissolve into a void. You stay being the individual, and that's part of seems to me what Christianity was trying to do, was saying the individual matters. And that's why we know the names of the Gospels, the early saints. Every person, whatever social standing they're from, is a saint in early Christianity. And it's the same in Jainism. So anyway, that's a little glimpse into what Jainism believes. And I've been going since 1995 to India to Jain conferences on peace and non-violence. And there's going to be one next January in 2024, just been announced by my Jain friend, Dr. S.L. Gandhi, in Mumbai, or Bombay. And it'll be hosted by the Svetambara Jain community, and I hope I'll go. And you know, these are fascinating meetings, so I hope to see friends there in India, and I know that they're very upset about the Ukraine war, as we all are on this planet. That's why I wrote my letter to Putin asking him to do the honourable thing and retire to a monastery. That would be a very Jain gesture. He realises, look, God, I made a mistake there. I've gone and killed loads of people. That's very bad for my karma. So I'm going to retire now, withdraw, and we'll have a truce. I think the other thing that Jainism, you could say, the other very important idea I want to convey is this idea of suspension of judgment. We call it epoche in Western philosophy. It was developed by Husserl, and he developed the whole of what's called phenomenology as a philosophical tradition out of it. So you don't rush to judgment. When I look at the periodic table, I don't say, oh, I don't like those red ones, oh, the pinks are horrible. No, I'm for the light yellows myself. No, you look at the whole lot objectively. You say, this is what the planet looks like. It's the conceptual map, if you want. And you suspend judgment on their absolute veracity. I mean, it's not up for us individually to judge. I've said again and again, there are realised beings in every single modality and every single box on the periodic table. And that's a very Jain sort of position, because they say that's potential of enlightenment is within everybody. You don't have to be a Jain, but you do have to be victorious in life. But you can be a victorious Christian or Buddhist or Hindu or Shintoist or new religious movement guy or whatever, or shaman. And the other thing that's very important, the other idea, is Anikantavada is the technical term in Prakrit, which is the Jain language of old India, like Sanskrit. Anekantavada is the teaching that there's no one absolute truth. There are many-sided ways of looking at phenomena. So if you ask, what is the truth about the nature of God, say, well, a Jain sage will say to you, Anekantavada, my friend, meaning how you look at it will determine what you see. If you're a Muslim, born and bred in Baghdad, and you've been reading the Quran and the Hadith all your entire life, and you regularly do the prayers, you're going to see God as shaped like Allah. All the teaching, the training, the learning you've done, your very high-level intellectual teaching at a university in Baghdad, you're going to think the universe, the God, is Allah-shaped. And that will be true for you. If you've been brought up in rabbinical circles in New York, and you've done your degree at the Jews College in New York, where I've gone and studied, and you speak Hebrew and Yiddish, and you know the entire Torah, and you've studied all the Kabbalah, and you've met all the great sages, you're going to think God will be Yahweh-shaped. I mean, indescribable, but kind of Yahweh-shaped. I mean, obviously God has no shape, but if you've been hanging around that school of rabbinic studies, you'll feel that the text is a window onto the nature of God. And if you use the Kabbalah as a tool to interpret it, you'll be able to sort of make sense of it. Well, the Jains would say, fine, that's also true simultaneously. If you're a Christian and you've been to a theological college and you've trained in Trinitarian Christianity, and you're a priest or a minister of the church, and you know an awful lot about the church traditions, and you're au fait with both ancient theology and modern theology, and you understand what the Trinity is all about, or think you do, then you're going to see God in a Trinitarian formula, sort of Christocentric formula. And that's also true. And so on with all the other descriptions. So now, for a Jain, therefore, truth coexists simultaneously relative to the consciousness of the person perceiving it. It's kind of a bit like Einstein said, things are relative. So ultimate truth is relative to your perceptual level. And therefore, Anekantavada is the label to describe that philosophically. What's going on when we say that is there's a many-sidedness to truth. A simple way of thinking about Anekantavada is to say that truth is like a diamond, a multi-faceted diamond, which sparkles the light in different directions, slightly differently. And therefore, when you say, what does the diamond look like? Well, it depends on where you're looking at it from. If you're looking at it from this angle, and you had a microscope, and you draw it, then it looks like this. If you're sitting at this angle, it looks like that. If you're looking from above, it looks like that, and so on and so on. So for the Jains, therefore, they say because the absolute truth is you can't draw it, because you can't literally draw it from all angles simultaneously, unless you study advanced maths, then you have to concede to tolerance. So if you shout at me, no, God is Allah-shaped, and you describe it from that direction, that I'm going to say absolutely, because that's where you're looking at the diamond from. If you say, no, God is Yahweh-shaped, that's absolutely fine. If you say, no, God is the Trinity shape, or God is the whatever of the other boxes, they're all true, yet none of them is absolutely true. That's what Mahavira was able to realise, and that the Jains have been teaching ever since, that notion of Anekantavada. Now, I find that quite intellectually sophisticated, and it rings true to me, because having studied them all, I think we need a sort of methodology whereby we can accept the truth that they represent without saying that anyone represents the whole truth. That seems to me the mistake that people have made spiritually and intellectually, some people throughout history. They have an insight, a realization, an enlightenment, and then they want to go out and convert everyone to their perspective, as if it's the only one. And, Marxists are the same. I mean, Marx had a certain insight and enlightenment experience, as him and Engels and Moses Hess and the circle of early Marxists, they were intelligent people. They had Hegelian-inspired Enlightenment experiences. But their mistake was, and it was then everybody has to see it like we do. And Marx picked fights with Proudhon and countless other intellectuals who were also seeing things which were true from their perspective, in relation, in the case of Marx, to how we end poverty on the planet, how we stop class war, how we stop the very rich persecuting and dominating the masses of the poor. I mean, those are really important questions. But the Jains would say there isn't just one way of doing that. We all need to collaborate and work on this. And that's why we have the box for the social sciences and some of the humanist boxes. Okay, so that's Anikantavada, and that I think is very important insight the Jains have given us, and that's why they're in the very middle of the periodic table. They're the pure white colour because of their white robes. Okay, the last one I want to look at, which I haven't really gone into in depth, is Sikhism, and there are three Sikh traditions. Box 111. 112. And again, Sikhism is fascinating, and it means, the word is from Punjabi, and it means just student, being a student. It's interesting, it sounds like the word to seek, being a seeker. And effectively, that's what Sikhism is. There's sort of two main branches of it, which are called religious Sikhism and philosophical Sikhism. It's been going since about 1499, we could say, when Guru Nanak came into the world. Guru Nanak lived in northern India, what's called the Punjab. It was a very interesting time to be born, actually, because India's always been a cradle of many religious movements and ideas. It's where Mahavira and Buddha came from. And this guy turned up 1,500 years after them. And for those 1,500 years, there'd been all different schools of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. There'd been Christian missionaries coming and going. And then there'd been lots of Muslims turn up, who became the dominant force in North India. And at the time of the Mughal dynasty, which was ruling northern India at this time, Islam was officially the #1 religion, but the Mughals became most of them became very tolerant, particularly Akbar, who's my favourite, because they met Jains, they met Hindus, they met Buddhists, fewer but some, and they lost their intolerance. They lost their kind of Muhammad or nothing type of attitude. And they realised the wisdom of Anikantavada. Now, India has that effect. It's like a magic spell it puts on you when you go there. You realise truth is much bigger than we thought. There was a famous English explorer called Francis Younghusband who went to India in the early 20th century, and he went to Lhasa in Tibet and spoke to the lamas about all this stuff. He'd been brought up an Anglican, and he found their metaphysics so profound and so deep. He was educated enough to understand it. He said it was like talking to these guys was like suddenly seeing the Himalayas for the first time, and all you'd seen up to them were the English South Downs. I mean, they're beautiful, they're lovely, we love them, but they're just not as big as the Himalayas. And so he realised that India and Tibet and that whole subcontinent is on a different plane of profundity. They've been musing and thinking about self, non-self, God, no God, the gods, the goddess, ever since like 3,000 years in writing and orally for thousands of years before that. The Upanishads are some of the oldest deep philosophical questions, discussion that we have. So when Guru Nanak was born, he inherited all that. He's a latecomer, and he knew it. He was very humble, and he studied it all. He went and talked to great Hindu sages, about the Upanishads. He went and talked to great Muslims about the Sufi scriptures, and he was in love with all of them, and with all their formulations, and with Jains as well. And he had an experience in his youth, in his teenage years, sort of late teens, when he was just beginning to ask questions. And it's said that this is the story, that he disappeared into the river one day, and everyone thought he drowned. And they, were sad. But then 3 days later, he came out downstream and announced there is no Hindu and there is no Muslim. There is only the unity. In other words, he'd reached a place of insight that the religious distinctions, which had caused endless bloodshed and wars by then, were dissolved. He'd reached a place in his own soul where he was both simultaneously a Hindu and a Muslim, simultaneously. And he then spent his life teaching, because the only response you can do when you have that insight, that enlightenment of fusion, or what Hegel called synthesis, you can no longer fight, because you can't fight either for the Hindus or the Muslims. You want to fight for them both simultaneously. And the only way you can do that is through education. So he set up a sort of study group to which he invited both Muslims and Hindus to come. And they studied each other's scriptures, and they realized that there's got to be a third way, a place of enlightenment. He wrote some of the most beautiful poetry based on his experiences. And that was written down by his followers. And then there was a succession of gurus from him. Guru Angad, Guru Amar Das, Guru Ram Das, Guru Arjan Dev. And each of these then gathered sayings, poetry, writings. Guru Har Krishan, Guru Teg Bahadur, and finally Guru Gobind Singh. Over this cycle of just over 100, from about 1499 down through to about the mid 1600s, was when this formative period happened. And then, and the name gradually grew that this was going to be called Sikhism, which simply means study periodism. The Sikhs are just scholars, really. I've been fortunate and blessed in my life to have met quite a few Sikhs, and I've been to the Punjab, where they come from. I had Sikh students who took me to meet their guru, and I've been to Amritsar, which is their sacred city, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. It was on land given by Akbar, the great Mughal emperor of India, who wanted the Sikhs to flourish. He himself, although a Muslim, wanted to found what he called the religion of light, the religion of Nur, light. He was like a Muslim New Age genius 400 years ago. And he therefore gave this land to the Sikhs because he recognized kindred spirits among them. And it's still flourishing to this day. They don't follow absolute non-violence as in the sense of Jains, because they say that to preserve tolerance, you sometimes have to fight off extremists. So some of these gurus were actually killed by extremist Muslims. The main problem they had in their day was from extremist Muslims, who were saying, no, you're heretics. Muhammad's the last prophet. You can't say Guru Nanak is a new prophet. It's heretical, and if you keep saying it, we're going to kill you. But they kept saying it, and therefore they had to arm. And Guru Gobind Singh, the last of these 10 gurus, he formed the Khalsa, which was like an armed, informed, defensive wing. So, people would take an oath to protect the community. Otherwise, it would have been wiped out. And the gurus, some of these gurus were killed, beheaded. One was sawn in half.